everybody. My name is Ingrid Harm-Ernandes, and I'm also known as the Pelvic Detective. I'd like to welcome you to a series of videos that we're going to be doing. I'm a pelvic PT for about 26 years and a PT for about 38 years. I built a women's health clinic up in New York initially, and then about 20 years ago, worked to build a program at Duke. I was the co-director and mentor for our residency program there and involved in lots of different research programs and other programs as well. So I am very excited to start a new kind of endeavor. I am now an author of the Musculoskeletal Mystery, How to Solve Your Pelvic Floor Symptoms. And I'm going to be partnering with Desert Harvest to bring you this series of videos. So we're pretty excited to bring you videos that are going to help you understand better your musculoskeletal system within the pelvis, just about pelvic health issues in general, how to find pelvic health practitioners. And we're also going to do some pretty awesome interviews with some practitioners in the field, some real good specialists that will also help you understand so much more about your pelvic system. So there's an awful lot of confusion regarding the pelvic region, what diagnoses a pelvic PT can see, how we can help, what are some of the things that people can do for themselves to really help get through this process. So these videos are designed to go through all of these different things and really dispel some myths, get people to understand a little bit better what the diagnoses are that we do see. So the diagnoses are there's a very, very large category of diagnoses. One is pelvic pain. So there's chronic pelvic pain, there's vulvodynia, there's vaginismus, there's pain with sex, and I can go on and on. There's interstitial cystitis or painful bladder syndrome. Just to mention a few. If we go on from there, there's something called prolapse. And in each subsequent video, we'll go through some of these things in detail so they make more sense. There's urinary incontinence, fecal incontinence, constipation, care during pregnancy, as well as after pregnancy, which is known as the fourth trimester. And there's going to be some video on that that really helps people understand what that is and what can happen during that time period and how you can get help. So that's really important to note. But again, in some future videos, we'll go into detail on that. So I did write my book, The Musculoskeletal Mystery, because I was really frustrated that it took so very long for patients to actually get into my clinic to see me. And I really didn't want that to happen anymore. So the book explains a lot about the musculoskeletal system and how that even impacts what your symptoms may be, what those symptoms are, how to find a practitioner, what does pelvic PT evaluation and treatment really mean, what's going to happen. So it's not so scary to actually go to see a pelvic PT. So the hope is that the book really will change some mindsets on that. So the videos are meant purely as educational. They're not meant so you can diagnose yourself or treat yourself, so to speak. It's meant so that you know what's going on with your body and how to reach out to the right practitioner and how to get appropriate care. So hopefully the videos and the book will really help you with that. So I think today what I'd like to do is start with the baseline. So that baseline is your pelvic floor itself and how it is connected to the core. And we're going to do a whole video on what the core is and what that means, because there's a lot of misconception about the core. So my book has some awesome drawings in it that really help you put together and connect the different parts of your pelvic floor, as well as the whole core, how it's all connected. So they're great pictures in the book and charts and graphs and so forth. So you can really, get a good idea of what's going on. But I think what I want to do now is just start at that ground floor, at the pelvic floor itself, and kind of explain what the pelvic floor is. So the pelvic floor is a group of muscles that sits at the base of our pelvis, and it has a lot of functions. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my pelvis here so you can really see what I'm talking about, right? So this is the entire pelvis, right? You see the bony pelvis. You look inside, you see the muscles of the pelvic floor, and on the outside, you kind of see the surface. So we're going to go and delve into that a little bit. And what does that really mean for you, right? So if you look at that from inside and then maybe from a side view, you can really see that the pelvic floor is like a hammock or a sling, right? So its one function is to hold up all your organs no matter what you're doing. Walking, lifting, coughing, sneezing, this pelvic floor has a lot of work to do, right? So you can imagine with all that pressure, sometimes that pelvic floor gets a little bit stretched out maybe, or doesn't function as well because of all that pressure on there. So that's part one. Then we have what's called our sphincters, right? So if we look here, we can see that the sphincters, which in this case is the urethral sphincter, this small little hole here, and the anal sphincter here. So what's a sphincter? It's a muscle that's basically circular in nature, and it can close down when we want it to and open when we want to open it. But if it's weak, sometimes it can open a little bit on its own. So if it's your urethra where that happens, you can imagine, so that's where the urine comes out. If that pops open on its own, we can have urine loss. If it pops open on its own at the anal area, then what happens there is we can lose bowel matter or fecal matter, right? So this is important to note that these sphincters really help control our bowel and our bladder, so our pee and our poop, in other words. So if there's something there, weakness, tightness, it can change how these function. The middle opening is the vaginal opening. So what I want to illustrate here is that there are muscles that circle around the vaginal opening. We've got the bulbocavernosus or bulbospongiosus, depending on if you have a penis or a vagina. And you have the ischiocavernosus here that runs along the bony prominence. So these muscles have a little bit more to do with, especially the bulbocavernosus, with intercourse. So if that's a little bit too tight, that can make intercourse painful, right? If it doesn't work well, we might not have good orgasm. So it can really affect the functions of sex. So that's a sexual function. So now we have support and sex and sphincter, 3 S's, that really help illustrate how important the pelvic floor is and how important it is for these muscles to work correctly. If we go back to the deeper muscles that I was showing you before, they do separate out into different muscles. Right now, we don't need to go into those in detail, but just realize they have different functions. So the muscle in the front here that circles around our rectum in the back can affect both urination and bowel movements. So if it's too tight, it might be painful to have a bowel movement. If it's too tight, it might irritate and cause urgency. So you can already see these muscles can sometimes mimic some pelvic issues that you have, right? So just to think about how those can affect us. Then the other thing that I do want to point out, there's a muscle here where my fingers are, called the obturator internus, right here. So that obturator internus is directly connected to our pelvic floor, and it is actually a hip muscle. So sometimes a tight obturator internus can make an impact on our pelvic floor and vice versa. So some hip problems can be directly related to the pelvic floor. More on that later in some other videos, but just so you get an idea that there are many muscles down here in the pelvis that can really impact pelvic floor symptoms, right? So pretty amazing. You can tell I'm an anatomy geek and I really love this, but I feel like if you get a good foundation to what's happening in the pelvis, then it makes it a lot easier to understand why you might be having some issues and some symptoms in the pelvic area, right? So hopefully that makes good sense so far. I like to call the bulbocavernosus the guardian of the vaginal canal. And that is because when it tightens up, it can indeed cause painful sex. If someone knows they're going to have painful sex, it becomes even more of a guardian and tightens up even more. So we can have a cyclical increase in pain with intercourse or with sex because this muscle tightens up. So the important thing to know is that this muscle here can really impact sex, and that is like, another of the functions of the pelvic floor. So now what we see is we have three important functions of the pelvic floor, and that is sexual, sphincteric, and supportive. And we can really see how important the pelvic floor is and how important proper function of the pelvic floor is. Pulled together so you can see these functions that the pelvic floor has. So it's not so simple and straightforward that it's just, oh, I'm going to do a Kegel, I'm going to get stronger, I'm going to do 100 of them in a day. No, that's not necessarily what works for people. We really have to look at how the pelvic floor functions. So as a pelvic PT, we're going to assess that. We're going to determine how it functions. Then we're going to give you exercises that really, really are important for the pelvic floor itself. So if you can get this all together as a baseline right now, then everything else we talk about in future videos will make perfect sense. And that's why I wanted to start with this. I feel like it's going to really help you understand what's going on at the pelvic floor, and then look forward to some subsequent videos that really pull everything else together and help you understand how you can help yourself, right? Empower you to help yourself. So this is just a little tiny snippet from the book, The Musculoskeletal Mystery, How to Solve Your Pelvic Floor Symptoms, which you can get at Desert Harvest or on Amazon. So looking forward to going to future videos and seeing again, and hoping this helps start your path to better pelvic health.